The grand hall of the Ilaran palace shimmered with ethereal light, a cascade of crystalline chandeliers casting intricate patterns across the silver-hued walls. Princess Elira stood at the center, her flowing gown of woven starlight draped elegantly over her curvaceous form. Her long silver hair, tinged with strands of violet, framed a face that combined regal beauty with a perpetual look of annoyance. She barely suppressed an eye roll as her father, Emperor Valoran, addressed her with a booming voice that echoed across the chamber. "This alliance is not negotiable, Elira," Valoran declared, his tone brooking no dissent. "The peace of our people depends on it." Elira's lavender eyes flared with defiance. "Peace or submission? Humans have done nothing but exploit every alliance they've ever forged. They don't deserve our trust, let alone my hand." Valoran's expression hardened, and his intricate crown of gleaming gems seemed to pulse with the gravity of his authority. "This is not about trust, it is about survival. The war left us vulnerable. The humans have resources we need, and they need our technology. A union will bind our fates together. And you're offering me up as the glue?" Elira's voice was sharp, each word laced with venom. "I am not a bargaining chip." The Emperor's face softened briefly, betraying a trace of paternal concern. "You are my daughter and my heir. Your duty is to your people, not your own whims. The human delegation arrives tonight. You will meet them, and you will behave with dignity." Before she could launch another protest, Valoran turned on his heel, his cape trailing behind him like a shadow. The doors of the chamber closed with an echoing thud, leaving Elira fuming. Her handmaiden, Seelan, stepped forward hesitantly. "Your Highness," she began, her voice cautious, "perhaps this isn't as hopeless as it seems. The humans are reckless, destructive, and entirely unworthy of our respect." Elira interjected, cutting her off. "I've read their histories, Seelan. They've been at war with themselves for millennia, and now they expect us to trust them because they've turned their greed outward into the stars?" Seelan didn't reply, knowing better than to argue when the princess was in one of her moods. Instead, she adjusted Elira's gown and murmured, "The banquet is in an hour. The delegation will be there." Elira sighed, her shoulders slumping as she resigned herself to the inevitable. "Fine, but I'm not going to like it." The banquet hall was a spectacle of grandeur, the long table laden with Ilaran delicacies that shimmered in colors too vivid for human eyes. Delegates from both species filled the room, the humans standing out with their bulky, utilitarian attire in stark contrast to the flowing elegance of Ilaran fashion. Elira entered with her head held high, her every step calculated to convey authority. Her gaze swept across the room, narrowing slightly when she spotted the human delegation. At their center was a man who immediately caught her attention, not for his appearance, though he was ruggedly handsome, with short dark hair and piercing green eyes, but for the way he carried himself. He stood apart from his companions, observing the room with a calm confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Captain Ethan Blake," Seelan whispered at her side. "He led the negotiations on the human side. A war hero, they say." "Of course they'd send a soldier," Elira muttered. "Diplomacy through intimidation. Typical." As if sensing her gaze, Ethan turned his head and met her eyes. For a moment, neither looked away. Elira expected him to bow or show some sign of deference, but instead he simply nodded, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. It was infuriating. The formalities began, with toasts and speeches about unity and cooperation. Elira tuned out most of it, focusing instead on Ethan, who seemed equally uninterested in the proceedings. Their eyes met again when the Emperor invited her to speak. Suppressing a sigh, she rose and delivered a carefully rehearsed statement about the importance of collaboration. Her words were diplomatic, but her tone betrayed her skepticism. When she sat down, Ethan leaned slightly toward her across the table. "Well said, Princess," he remarked, his voice low but carrying a teasing edge, "though I could feel your enthusiasm from here." Elira arched an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware humans were so attuned to subtlety. Perhaps there's hope for your kind yet." His smirk widened. "Oh, we can be quite perceptive when we want to be. Before she could respond, a sudden commotion drew their attention. An alarm blared, and the room's ambient light shifted to a pulsing red. Guards rushed in, shouting about a breach in the palace's atmospheric shield. Ethan was on his feet instantly, his hand resting on the hilt of a weapon at his side. "What's the protocol for this?" he asked, his voice sharp and commanding. Illyra rose as well, her expression turning serious. "Follow me," she said, her earlier disdain momentarily set aside. "If the shield is down, we need to secure the generators." Together, they led a group of guards through the labyrinthine halls of the palace. The air grew colder as they neared the generator chamber, the breach evident in the thin layer of frost forming on the walls. Inside, they found the control panel damaged and a group of Illyran saboteurs attempting to disable the backup systems. Ethan didn't hesitate. He charged forward, disarming one of the saboteurs with practiced efficiency. Illyra followed, using her Illyran abilities to incapacitate another with a burst of shimmering energy. Despite their differences, they worked seamlessly, their movements complementing each other. When the last saboteur was subdued, Illyra turned to Ethan, her breathing heavy. "Not bad for a human," she admitted reluctantly. He gave her a lopsided grin. "Not bad for a princess." She rolled her eyes but couldn't entirely suppress the small smile that tugged at her lips. For the first time, she found herself wondering if perhaps there was more to humans than she'd given them credit for. The atmosphere in the palace remained tense long after the breach was contained. Illyran engineers worked tirelessly to repair the damaged shield, while guards doubled their patrols to ensure no further incidents. Illyra found herself standing in a briefing chamber alongside Ethan, reviewing the aftermath with the Palace Security Council. Preliminary analysis confirms it was an internal sabotage, one of the lead engineers reported. The attackers used advanced cloaking tech to bypass initial scans. It appears they had help from someone with access. Illyra's jaw tightened, her mind racing. The implications were grim, an Illyran faction actively working to destabilize peace efforts. She glanced at Ethan, who was studying the report with a focused intensity. His presence still irritated her, but she couldn't deny he had proven himself capable during the crisis. "We should launch a full investigation into all palace staff and recent visitors," Ethan suggested, his tone calm but commanding. Whoever orchestrated this might still be on site. The council members exchanged uncertain glances before Illyra spoke up. "He's right. We can't afford to leave any stone unturned. Selen, compile a list of everyone who's had clearance near the generator room in the last month." Selen nodded and hurried off to carry out the order. As the council dispersed, Ethan approached Illyra, his expression unreadable. "You handled that well," he said, "for someone who'd rather not be working with humans." Illyra folded her arms, her gaze sharp. "Don't mistake necessity for preference. This doesn't change my opinion of your kind." Ethan smirked, undeterred. "Fair enough. But it seems like we make a decent team when the stakes are high." She opened her mouth to deliver a retort but found herself at a loss. Instead, she turned and strode out of the chamber, her thoughts more conflicted than she cared to admit. Later that evening, Illyra returned to her private quarters, hoping to find solace in solitude. Instead, she was greeted by Selen, who carried a data tablet loaded with reports from the initial investigation. "Your Highness," Selen began hesitantly, "the preliminary findings suggest the saboteurs had knowledge of the shield's vulnerabilities. They weren't amateurs." Illyra sighed, taking the tablet and scanning the data. "Sabotage during a diplomatic visit. It's clearly aimed at derailing the treaty." Selen hesitated, then added, "Captain Blake has requested to join the investigation. He believes his perspective could be useful." Illyra frowned, her irritation bubbling to the surface. "Of course he does. He can't seem to resist inserting himself into our affairs." "With respect, Your Highness," Selen ventured, "he's proven himself resourceful. Perhaps his involvement wouldn't be so terrible." Illyra waved her off, still skeptical but unwilling to dismiss the possibility entirely. "Fine, inform him. He'll accompany me tomorrow when we inspect the damaged systems." The following day, Elira and Ethan stood side by side in the generator chamber, the air still heavy with the lingering chill from the breach. Ilaran technicians worked diligently around them, their holographic tools casting faint glows across the room. Ethan crouched near the damaged control panel, examining the scorch marks left by the saboteur's devices. Whoever did this knew exactly where to hit. These systems are incredibly advanced, yet they bypassed multiple redundancies. Elira crossed her arms, watching him work. "Are you implying it was one of us?" He straightened, meeting her gaze. "I'm saying it's a possibility. You don't seem the type to shy away from hard truths." She bristled at his observation but couldn't entirely dismiss it. "We need to be ready for anything. Do you have a weapon?" She stood, summoning a faintly glowing blade from a bracelet on her wrist. The energy hummed as the blade solidified, its edges sharp enough to cut through most materials. "I can handle myself." "I don't doubt it," Ethan replied, drawing his own sidearm. "But let's stick together. I'd hate to explain to your father why I let something happen to his favorite daughter." Elira raised an eyebrow. "I'm his only daughter?" "Exactly," Ethan said, flashing a brief grin before motioning for her to lead the way. The research facility was eerily quiet, the usual hum of machinery replaced by an unsettling stillness. They moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the sleek flooring. Elira's senses were on high alert, every shadow and flicker of light a potential threat. They found the source of the breach in one of the primary labs. A cloaked figure was hunched over a console, their hands moving rapidly across the interface. The air shimmered with the glow of unstable energy as the saboteur worked to bypass another layer of security. "Stop!" Elira commanded, her voice ringing out with authority. The figure whirled around, revealing a masked face. Without hesitation, they activated a device on their wrist, sending a pulse of energy that knocked Elira and Ethan back. Ethan recovered quickly, firing a precise shot that disabled the device, while Elira launched herself forward, her blade cutting through the air with deadly grace. The saboteur was skilled, dodging her strikes with agility and returning blows. With a plasma dagger, Ethan joined the fray, his movements complementing Elira's as they worked together to corner their opponent. The fight was intense, each strike and counterstrike a testament to their respective training. Finally, Elira saw an opening and disarmed the saboteur, her blade slicing through the plasma dagger. Ethan tackled the figure to the ground, pinning them with a firm grip. With a sharp motion, he removed the mask, revealing an Ilaran face, a young man with defiant eyes. "You betrayed your people," Elira said, her voice cold with fury. "Why?" the man sneered. "Because peace with humans is a lie. They'll destroy us from within, just as they've done to every world they've touched." Elira's jaw tightened, her mind reeling. She wanted to argue, to refute his words, but the conviction in his voice struck a nerve. Before she could respond, the man activated a hidden device, releasing a blinding flash of light. When the light faded, he was gone, leaving behind only a faint scorch mark where he had stood. Ethan cursed under his breath. "Teleportation tech, great." Elira sheathed her blade, her expression hardening. "This isn't over. If there's one saboteur, there are more." Ethan nodded. "Then we'll find them together." For the first time, Elira didn't object to the word "together." The palace's mood darkened further in the wake of the saboteur's escape. Elira and Ethan returned to the command center to strategize their next move, but the unanswered questions weighed heavily on them both. Who was behind the sabotage, and what was their ultimate goal? The answers seemed frustratingly out of reach. Elira stood at the central holographic display, her sharp features illuminated by the shifting blue light of the projected schematics. Ethan watched her from across the room, noting the tension in her posture. For all her regal confidence, she looked as though the weight of the entire treaty rested on her shoulders. "You're overthinking," Ethan said, breaking the silence. Elira shot him a glare. "I don't recall asking for your opinion." "Doesn't mean you don't need it," he replied, walking over to stand beside her. "Sometimes you need to take a step back to see the bigger picture." "And what would you know about diplomacy, Captain?" she retorted, her tone sharp. "Not much," Ethan admitted with a shrug. "But I do know how to deal with insurgents. Trust me, this isn't about ideology, it's about leverage. They're trying to destabilize the treaty because it threatens whatever power they're holding on to." Illyra frowned, considering his words. Much as she hated to admit it, he had a point. The factions opposed to peace stood to lose influence if humans and Illyrans united. Still, her pride resisted giving him too much credit. "Fine," she said grudgingly. "If you're so insightful, what do you suggest?" Ethan leaned against the console, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "First, we track down their resources. That cloaking tech and teleportation gear didn't come out of nowhere. If we follow the supply chain, we'll find them." "And second?" she asked, arching a skeptical brow. He grinned. "We set a trap." The plan was risky, but it was their best shot. Illyra and Ethan decided to use a decoy shipment of advanced Illaran tech as bait, spreading false intel through controlled channels to lure the saboteurs out of hiding. "And what truths about your people should I be prepared to confront, Captain? That humans are just as likely to betray as they are to cooperate?" His expression darkened slightly, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. "People are capable of both great destruction and great sacrifice, Princess. I've seen plenty of both, on both sides." For a moment, the tension between them shifted, less combative and more charged. Illyra quickly turned away, focusing her attention on the technicians. "We should focus on identifying the saboteurs, not debating philosophy." "Agreed," Ethan replied, though there was a faint smile on his lips, as if he found her stubbornness amusing. As the day wore on, they uncovered more evidence. A fragment of a cloaking device and traces of a rare Illyran alloy, not commonly used in palace systems. The findings pointed toward an organized group with access to high-level resources. Back in the briefing chamber, Illyra and Ethan reviewed their findings with the council. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. If this group is operating within the palace, they've likely got more than one objective. We should anticipate another move soon. Illyra nodded reluctantly, acknowledging the validity of his assessment. "Then we need to stay one step ahead. Increase surveillance on all key systems and restrict access to sensitive areas." As the council adjourned, Ethan lingered, his gaze lingering on Illyra. "You know," he said, his tone lighter now, "for someone who claims to despise humans, you're surprisingly good at working with one." She shot him a withering look. "Don't let it go to your head, Captain." He chuckled, clearly unfazed. "Wouldn't dream of it." As he walked away, Illyra couldn't help but feel a flicker of frustration, not just with him, but with herself. He was challenging her in ways she hadn't anticipated, forcing her to confront the cracks in her own convictions. And for all her resistance, a small part of her was beginning to wonder if he might just be worth the trouble. The tension in the palace was palpable as the investigation deepened. Every corridor seemed to buzz with quiet suspicion, Illyran guards standing at attention, while technicians worked around the clock to secure critical systems. Despite her misgivings, Illyra found herself spending more time with Ethan than she cared to admit, their joint efforts yielding insights neither could have uncovered alone. They stood in the archives, a vast chamber filled with holographic records and shimmering data streams that stretched as far as the eye could see. Illyra was reviewing access logs for the shield generators, her sharp lavender eyes scanning the projections with meticulous precision. Ethan leaned against a nearby console, his posture casual but his gaze focused. "Impressive setup," he said, nodding toward the glowing streams of data. "I take it your people don't do anything halfway. Efficiency is a hallmark of Illaran design," Illyra replied without looking up. "Though I wouldn't expect a human to appreciate such intricacies." Ethan smirked, unfazed. "We're not as primitive as you think. Some of us even know how to read." Illyra shot him a withering look, though the corner of her mouth twitched, betraying a hint of amusement. "Sarcasm isn't a substitute for intellect, Captain." "Good thing I've got both," he quipped, stepping closer to peer at the data she was analyzing. "What's that?" She pointed to a cluster of timestamps marked in a distinctive Illiran script. Unauthorized access during the breach. The logs show an override from a console in the East Wing, but the device ID doesn't match any registered systems. Ethan frowned, his expression turning serious. A ghost terminal? Someone's been hiding their tracks. Exactly, Elira said, her tone clipped. Which means we're dealing with someone who knows our protocols intimately. Or someone on the inside, Ethan added. His green eyes met hers, and for once there was no teasing in his gaze, only determination. What's in the East Wing? Elira hesitated. Research facilities, laboratories. Some are classified. She turned away, her voice growing colder. If they've tampered with anything there, the consequences could be catastrophic. Then we'd better move fast, Ethan said, already heading toward the exit. Their journey to the East Wing was swift but tense, neither speaking as they navigated the labyrinthine halls of the palace. The closer they got, the colder the air became, a lingering effect of the breached shield, Elira noted grimly. When they reached the entrance to the restricted area, they found the guards unconscious, their forms slumped against the walls. Elira knelt to check one of the guards, her fingers glowing faintly as she used an Illiran healing technique to stabilize his vitals. He's alive, but barely. Whoever did this is ruthless. Ethan crouched beside her, his expression grim. The shipment was set to depart from a remote outpost, with a small strike team standing by to intercept any attackers. As they prepared for the mission, Elira found herself working closely with Ethan to coordinate the operation. Despite their initial animosity, their collaboration had begun to take on an almost natural rhythm. He challenged her in ways that frustrated and intrigued her, and she couldn't deny that his perspective often filled gaps in her own thinking. "You've got that look again," Ethan said as they reviewed the final details in the command center. "What look?" she asked, not looking up from the tactical map. "The one that says, 'I can't believe I'm stuck working with this human,'" he teased. She gave him a sidelong glance, her lips twitching in a reluctant smile. "It's accurate." "Careful, princess," he said with a mock-serious tone. "You're starting to grow on me." She rolled her eyes but didn't reply, focusing instead on the task at hand. Yet his words lingered, uninvited, in the back of her mind. The outpost was a stark contrast to the opulence of the palace, a simple structure nestled in the rocky terrain of Elira's southern plains. Elira and Ethan arrived ahead of the decoy shipment, taking up positions in a concealed observation post with their strike team. The night was eerily quiet, the stars above glinting coldly against the darkness. Ethan adjusted his binoculars, scanning the area for any signs of movement. "You think they'll take the bait?" "They'd be fools not to," Elira replied. "The intel we leaked points to this shipment as critical to the treaty's success. If they don't show, it's because they're already aware of our trap." "Optimistic," he muttered. "I like it." She ignored him, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the perimeter. Minutes stretched into an hour, the stillness broken only by the occasional crackle of their comms. Just when doubt began to creep in, a faint shimmer appeared on the horizon. "Contact," Ethan said, his voice low but sharp. "Southwest quadrant, cloaking field." Elira activated her visor, which highlighted the distortion in the air. Several figures emerged, their forms partially concealed by the shimmering field. They moved with precision, heading straight for the decoy shipment. "Wait for my signal," Elira instructed her team, her voice steady. She turned to Ethan. "Ready?" He nodded, gripping his weapon. "Let's give them a warm welcome." The saboteurs reached the decoy, one of them activating a scanner to inspect the contents. Elira watched closely, waiting for the perfect moment. When the scanner emitted a green light, signaling the cargo's value, she gave the order. "Now!" The strike team sprang into action, surrounding the saboteurs with swift precision. Elira and Ethan led the charge, their weapons drawn. The saboteurs fought back fiercely, using advanced tech to shield themselves and counterattack. Energy blasts lit up the night, the clash of forces reverberating through the rocky terrain. Amid the chaos, Elira found herself face to face with one of the attackers, a tall, masked figure wielding a plasma staff. Their movements were swift and calculated, forcing her to draw on all her training to keep up. She blocked a strike aimed at her side, countering with a precise slash that forced her opponent back. Nearby, Ethan was locked in his own battle, his agility and quick reflexes keeping him one step ahead of his assailant. He glanced over at Elira, a mix of admiration and concern flashing across his face as he saw her holding her own. "Don't worry about me, Captain," she called out, parrying another strike. "Wasn't planning to!" He shot back, grinning despite the tension. The tide of the battle shifted as the strike team gained the upper hand. Several saboteurs were subdued, their cloaking devices disabled. The remaining attackers attempted to retreat, but Elira and Ethan pursued them relentlessly, determined not to let any escape. In the end, the mission was a success, though not without cost. The saboteurs had been captured, and their equipment confiscated for analysis, but the encounter had left Elira with more questions than answers. As she stood amidst the aftermath, her thoughts returned to the masked figure's skill and determination. "Looks like we're making progress," Ethan said, joining her. He was battered but still standing tall, a faint smirk on his lips. "Teamwork's not so bad, is it?" She gave him a pointed look, though there was no venom in her tone. "Don't get used to it." But as they returned to the palace, Elira couldn't shake the feeling that their partnership, however begrudging, might be exactly what was needed to uncover the truth. The night following the raid on the decoy shipment was tense, the weight of the captured saboteurs' intel hanging over the palace. Elira barely slept, her thoughts whirling with possibilities. The information they'd seized from their attackers was fragmented, but it pointed to a far more intricate conspiracy than she'd initially anticipated. The saboteurs weren't just rogue elements. They were part of a larger, organized faction. As dawn broke, she found herself in the command center once again, staring at the holographic map that displayed the suspected routes of the saboteur cells. Ethan stood beside her, their earlier banter now replaced by a quiet understanding. The Kaiku connection between them had shifted. Something more was beginning to simmer beneath the surface. "You said it yourself," Elira muttered, tapping the holographic map. "This isn't just about a few rogue individuals. This is a war in the shadows." Ethan leaned in, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen. "Yeah, and if we don't root them out, it's going to get ugly fast." Elira's pulse quickened at the weight of his words. She had spent her life fighting for peace, trying to keep the fragile alliance with humans intact, but now she felt a deeper urgency to protect her people, her kingdom, and her heart. Ethan glanced at her as if sensing her inner conflict. "We'll figure this out," he said quietly, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "Together." The simplicity of his words struck her. Elira turned to face him, her lavender eyes locking onto his. There was something unspoken between them now, a thread connecting their fates. It wasn't just the mission that bound them. It was something more, something deeper that neither of them fully understood yet. "Let's get to work," she said finally, breaking the tension with her usual cold professionalism. "We don't have time for distractions." Ethan didn't push, though. His lips twitched as if he was holding back a comment. Right, no distractions. They spent the next few hours sifting through the data they'd recovered, piecing together a trail that led to a hidden base located on a remote asteroid in the outer rim. The coordinates were buried deep within encrypted files, but with their combined efforts, they managed to decrypt the location. "This is it," Elira said, her voice taut. "The heart of the operation." "We'll need a strike team," Ethan said. "One that can handle anything they throw at us." Elira nodded. "I'll arrange it." She could feel the pressure mounting. This was it, the final confrontation with the shadow faction that threatened the very peace they had fought so hard to build. There would be no more playing it safe. This time, they would go on the offensive. The asteroid base loomed ahead, a dark and foreboding silhouette against the backdrop of distant stars. Elira and Ethan stood together on the bridge of the Ilaran warship, the hum of the engines vibrating beneath their feet. The tension was palpable, the weight of the upcoming battle hanging heavy in the air. "Ready?" Ethan asked, his voice low and steady. Elira didn't answer immediately. She stood by the viewport watching as the asteroid base grew closer. It was a lifeless rock, barely habitable, but it was fortified. Reinforced walls and weapon systems were visible on its surface. "This is it," she said finally, her voice distant. "No turning back now." Ethan's gaze softened for a moment. "We'll make it through. You've got the best team at your back." She nodded, though her heart raced in her chest. Elira wasn't just fighting for her people anymore. She was fighting for a future, for a peace that had never seemed so fragile. And for the first time, she realized she was fighting for him, too. There was a deep, unspoken connection between them, one that had grown with each passing day of their collaboration. The ship shuddered as it entered the asteroid's atmosphere, the gravity well pulling them closer. Elira's pulse quickened, but she remained focused, her mind set on the mission. "All systems green," she reported to the crew. "Prepare for landing." As the ship touched down, the strike team was already assembled, ready for action. Elira, Ethan, and a small contingent of elite Ilaran soldiers would breach the facility, while a backup unit would monitor the perimeter for any potential escapes. The plan was simple: find the heart of the operation, neutralize the threat, and take down any saboteurs they encountered. The moment they disembarked, Elira felt a surge of adrenaline. The asteroid's surface was barren, rocky, and desolate, but the hum of concealed machinery was unmistakable. This was no simple outpost. It was a military stronghold, and it was about to fall. "Stay sharp," Elira ordered, her voice calm but commanding. "We don't know what we're up against." The team moved in a tight formation, weapons at the ready. The air was thin, the low gravity adding an extra layer of challenge to their movements, but they were prepared. They had to be. Ethan stepped closer to the screen, studying the individuals on the screen. But why go this far? The treaty's not even fully in effect yet. "It's more than just the treaty," Elira said, her voice darkening. "They want control. These people believe Elira should stand alone, and they're willing to do anything to ensure that. Even destroy everything else in the process?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with growing understanding. "Especially that," Elira replied. She turned to her team, her eyes alight with the fire of conviction. "We're going after them. Now." But as she spoke, the lights in the chamber flickered. An ominous warning. The hum of the facility's defenses kicked into high gear, and the doors to the command center slammed shut with a loud metallic clang. Elira's heart raced. They knew we'd be here. "We're not leaving without answers," Ethan said, his tone steady despite the growing chaos. He pulled out his weapon, ready for whatever came next. "Stay sharp," Elira commanded, her eyes scanning the room for an escape route. "They'll send everything they have at us." The tension in the room thickened, the air crackling with impending violence. And then, just as suddenly as the doors had slammed shut, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed from the hallway. Elira's pulse quickened. More enemies, more resistance. This fight was far from over. The sound of weapons being readied filled the air, and Elira stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. But before they could react, a holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the room, casting an eerie glow. The figure that appeared was cloaked in shadow, its features obscured by a dark hood. Elira instinctively reached for her weapon, but the figure's voice rang out, smooth and commanding. "You've come a long way, princess," the voice said, a tone dripping with cold amusement. "But this is where it ends." Elira's eyes narrowed as she recognized the voice, one of the leaders from the Shadow faction. The figure smirked as it began to speak again, but Ethan moved first, lunging toward the control panel. "Now's our chance," he yelled, slamming his fist down on a console, sending a surge of power coursing through the facility. The lights flickered, the base's systems beginning to destabilize as the explosion of energy coursed through its wires. The projection of the leader flickered and distorted as the power grid began to fail. "Not so fast!" the figure shouted, its form glitching as the systems failed. But it was too late. Elira looked over at Ethan, her heart racing. "Get to the exit now." They made their move, sprinting toward the nearest hallway as the facility began to implode. The sabotage had worked. The enemy had underestimated them. The base was coming apart at the seams, and now it was a race against time to get out alive. As they reached the exit, Elira glanced at Ethan. Her breath came in sharp gasps, but her eyes were locked on his, filled with a newfound trust. They had done it, together. And despite the chaos that loomed on the horizon, she knew one thing for certain. They weren't done yet. The ship blasted off from the asteroid's surface, the rumble of its engines resonating through the hull as the team made their escape. Elira and Ethan were both silent, each lost in their thoughts as the devastation of the base they had just left behind began to sink in. Their mission was far from over, but for the first time, Elira felt something she hadn't expected: relief. The explosion had dealt a significant blow to the Shadow Faction's plans, but it hadn't dismantled them entirely. There was still much to be done, but the mission had been a success, and that meant the Alliance had a chance. Elira exhaled deeply as she looked out the viewport, her gaze lost in the endless stars beyond. "We did it," Ethan said quietly, standing beside her. "Did we?" Elira replied, her voice heavy with uncertainty. "We stopped them for now, but this isn't over. They'll be back, and when they are, we'll have to be ready." Ethan nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. "Yeah, but we're stronger now. They didn't expect us to strike back like we did. They've underestimated us before, and they'll do it again." Elira smiled faintly, a brief flicker of pride in her chest. "I suppose you're right." The ship's comm system buzzed, breaking the moment of silence. "Princess Elira, we're receiving a transmission from the Council," a voice said through the speaker. Elira's expression shifted instantly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Patch it through," she ordered. The holographic projection flickered to life, revealing the stern faces of the Council members. They had been quiet for too long, and now it was time to hear what they had to say. The leader of the Council, an older Illyron man with a severe expression, addressed her. "Princess Elira, we've been informed of the attack on the base. I trust you are unharmed." As they approached the entrance to the base, they encountered the first sign of resistance: laser fire erupting from concealed turrets mounted along the facility's walls. Elira instinctively raised her shield, the energy field crackling as it absorbed the blasts. "Take cover!" Ethan shouted, his own weapon blazing as he returned fire. Elira signaled her team to advance, using her blade to slice through any obstacles in their way. Her movements were fluid, precise, every strike calculated to disable, not kill. She had learned long ago that there were lines she wouldn't cross, no matter the stakes. But that didn't mean she wasn't capable of defending herself when the time came. The team fought their way inside, the battle intensifying as they pushed deeper into the base. Elira's thoughts were a blur, her senses honed to every movement, every sound. The tension was palpable, the uncertainty of what lay ahead gnawing at her. But through it all, Ethan remained by her side, his presence a quiet reassurance in the chaos. "Up ahead," Elira said, pointing to a corridor that branched off from the main hallway. "That's where the main command center is located." Ethan nodded, his gaze locked onto hers. "Lead the way." They advanced cautiously, their every step measured, but as they neared the command center, the unmistakable hum of an energy shield flickered to life ahead of them, blocking their path. "Not again," Ethan muttered under his breath. "This feels like a trap." Elira didn't hesitate. "We'll find a way through. Keep moving." But even as she spoke, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. The sabotage, the conspiracy, it was all connected, and they were about to uncover the full extent of the enemy's plan. They approached the energy shield, scanning the area for any signs of weakness. Elira's mind raced. If this was a trap, it was expertly laid. There was no immediate escape route, and the shield was too strong to bypass with standard weaponry. The enemy had anticipated their every move, but Elira wasn't going to back down now. "Suggestions?" she asked, her voice low, focused. Ethan stepped forward, examining the structure of the shield. "There's gotta be a control panel around here somewhere. We can't go through it, but maybe we can shut it down." Elira glanced around, spotting a narrow hallway that led to a small alcove. "There, we'll check it." They made their way to the alcove, the team following close behind. Elira's hand instinctively brushed the hilt of her blade, though she kept her weapon down for now. The quiet urgency between them was palpable, a sense that every second mattered. They found the control panel embedded in the wall of the alcove, its interface flashing in an array of encrypted symbols. Elira studied it for a moment before nodding toward Ethan. "Can you crack it?" "Give me a minute," he said, his voice steady. He knelt down, interfacing with the panel and rapidly inputting commands. His fingers moved quickly, but his expression was calm, almost detached, as though he were dealing with any other technical issue. Elira watched him, a flicker of admiration rising in her chest. There was something about how he worked, so unbothered, so skilled. It was a rare quality in humans, she realized, but one that she was starting to respect. Seconds dragged into minutes, the tension rising with each passing moment. Finally, Ethan swore under his breath as the panel buzzed, and the energy shield flickered before deactivating entirely. "Got it," he said, standing up with a grin. "Your turn." "Let's move," Elira ordered, her voice sharp with purpose. The team surged forward, adrenaline coursing through their veins. As they moved deeper into the base, the path grew more labyrinthine, the corridors darker and more foreboding. But Elira felt a sense of determination harden within her. This was it. They were on the brink of uncovering everything. They came upon a large chamber, its walls lined with high-tech consoles and glowing interfaces. At the far end of the room stood a series of enormous screens, all displaying encrypted data, streams that Elira immediately recognized as critical intelligence. She stepped forward, her eyes scanning the information, but the sight that met her gaze wasn't just technical. It was a message. That's them," Elira murmured, her voice tinged with disbelief. The screens revealed a network of connected leaders, each one an influential figure within Elira's government, meeting in secrecy. They were orchestrating a massive campaign to destabilize the peace treaty, using everything from misinformation to sabotage to turn public. "Opinion. What's going on here?" Ethan's voice cut through her shock, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the same data. Elira clenched her fists, fury bubbling to the surface. "They're planning to undermine everything we've worked for." Elira nodded, her posture stiffening. "I'm fine, but we've uncovered something much worse than we anticipated. The sabotage was part of a larger operation. The Shadow faction is embedded within our government, and their goal is to destroy the peace treaty with the humans." The council leader's eyes darkened, his voice laced with disbelief. "Are you certain? This is a grave accusation, Princess." "I've seen the evidence," Elira replied coldly, her gaze unwavering. "This isn't just a few rogue elements. It's a coordinated effort with high-ranking officials involved. If we don't act fast, the treaty will be in jeopardy." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the council members. They knew she was right. The implications were staggering, and the very fabric of their civilization was at risk. "We will discuss this further," the council leader said after a long pause. "In the meantime, we expect your immediate return to Elira for further consultation." Elira's mind raced. She didn't trust them, not entirely. She had worked alongside them long enough to know that some of them were as likely to be involved in the conspiracy as the enemies they fought, but she couldn't say that aloud. Not yet. Not with the eyes of the galaxy on her. "I'll be there." "Shortly," Elira replied, her voice cold. "But know this, we cannot afford to wait. If we're going to stop this, we need action now." The projection flickered off, leaving Elira and Ethan in tense silence. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You think they're part of it?" he asked quietly, his voice low enough so only she could hear. "I don't know," Elira said, her voice tight with frustration. "But I don't trust them, not completely." Ethan's hand brushed against hers in a quiet gesture of reassurance. "You're not alone in this, Elira. We'll figure it out. Together." Her heart fluttered at the sincerity in his voice, and for a moment the weight of the mission seemed a little lighter, but only for a moment. The truth was that they were running out of time, and the deeper they delved into the conspiracy, the more dangerous things became. Hours later, the warship arrived at Elira's capital city, the gleaming spires of the city rising against the purple sky. Elira couldn't help but feel the weight of it all, returning home but knowing that it would never be the same. The peace she had fought for, the future she had envisioned for her people and the humans, they were all at risk. And yet there was no other choice. She had to face the council. Ethan stood by her side as they made their way to the council chamber. The high walls and ornate carvings of the palace felt colder than usual, their grandeur now a reminder of the fragility of the world they inhabited. "I'm with you," Ethan said, his voice low. "Whatever happens in there, we face it together." Elira gave him a brief, appreciative look. "I know. And that means everything." They entered the council chamber, the heavy doors closing behind them. With a resounding thud, the council members were already seated, their faces stern as they turned toward her. It was clear they were already aware of the situation. Elira took her place at the center of the room, her gaze sweeping over the council members as she addressed them. "We need to act quickly. The Shadow Faction's plan is already in motion, and if we don't stop them now, we risk losing everything we've built." The council leader, his voice grave, responded, "We understand the gravity of the situation, Princess, but we must proceed cautiously. We cannot risk destabilizing the kingdom further by rushing into action." Elira's patience, already stretched thin, snapped. "Cautiously? How much longer do you expect us to wait? We don't have time for cautious deliberation. We need to expose them now, before they destroy us from within." The council murmured, among themselves, some nodding in agreement, others looking uneasy. Elira's pulse raced, the frustration of the past few days boiling over. But she knew she couldn't afford to lose control now, not with so much at stake. "Princess," one of the younger council members spoke up, his voice shaky. "What if the people don't believe us? What if they think we're fabricating these accusations to justify war with the humans?" "They'll believe the truth when we show them," Elira said, her voice steely. "The people deserve to know what's really happening. If you're not with me, then you're just as guilty as the ones conspiring against us." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. Elira's eyes locked with the council leaders. It was clear. This was the moment that would determine everything. Either they would join her, or they would remain complacent, unwilling to take the necessary steps to protect their people. She was ready to go it alone if she had to. The council chamber was still, tension hanging in the air as Elira stared down the council members. The weight of their silence felt suffocating, and she could feel the familiar heat rising in her chest. They were waiting for her to back down, for her to doubt herself. But she wouldn't. Not this time. "I'll say it again," Elira said, her voice calm but firm. "We need action now. The Shadow Faction is too deep within our ranks for us to sit back and wait for them to make their move. The time for caution has passed." Ethan stood by her side, his presence a quiet but steady reassurance. "She's right. If we don't act fast, they'll have us in their grip before we even realize it." One of the older council members, a woman, with sharp eyes and a graying mane of hair, finally spoke. "You speak of action, Princess, but how do you propose we expose them? We cannot go to war on baseless accusations." Elira's gaze locked onto hers. "I never said anything about baseless. The evidence is clear. We have recordings, documents, everything we need to prove their betrayal." The council shifted uneasily, but no one interrupted. The council leader, the man who had spoken before, regarded her with a calculating expression. "And what do you propose we do, Princess? Take this evidence and throw it into the public's face? The people are already on edge. If we expose these traitors without careful preparation, we risk inciting a civil war. This could tear the kingdom apart." Elira clenched her jaw, her patience thinning. "If we don't expose them, the kingdom will tear itself apart anyway. We can't let them win. I'm not asking for a war, I'm asking for justice." "Justice," the council leader repeated with a hollow laugh. "Do you truly believe the people will rally behind you after everything that has happened? The last thing they need is more instability. They need the truth," Elira shot back, her voice rising with the urgency of her conviction. "They deserve to know what's really happening, and I won't stop until they do." There was a long pause, the murmurs of the council growing louder as they whispered amongst themselves. Elira didn't back down, her stance unwavering. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, offering silent support, and for the first time, Elira realized how much he had come to mean to her. He was her anchor in this chaos, the one person who always had her back. Finally, the council leader sighed and nodded, as if a decision had been made within his own mind. "Very well, but we will do this carefully. We will expose the Shadow faction, but on our terms. We cannot afford to create more chaos than we already have." Elira's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of relief and frustration washing over her. "Thank you," she said curtly, though she still didn't fully trust them. "But make no mistake, we will act. I won't allow them to destroy everything we've worked for." The council murmured in agreement, some still hesitant but others nodding in approval. As the meeting concluded and the council members began to filter out of the chamber, Elira turned to Ethan, her mind still racing with the enormity of what lay ahead. The battle was far from over, but at least they had allies now, at least for the moment. "You okay?" Ethan asked, his voice soft. Elira nodded, though the weight of her thoughts was heavy. "I'm just tired. I don't know who I can trust anymore." "You've got me," Ethan said, his voice steady and sure, "and I won't let you down." Elira looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat at the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't just a soldier to her anymore. He was something more, but she couldn't afford to focus on that now, not with everything on the line. "Thank you, Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "You don't have to thank me," he replied with a smile. "I'm with you, Elira. Always." As they left the council chamber, Elira felt the weight of their words and the burden of what lay ahead. She had taken the first step in exposing the conspiracy, but the real fight was just beginning. The Shadow faction would come for her. They'd come for them all. And when they did, she would be ready. The days ahead would be filled with danger and uncertainty, but Elira knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone in this. Not anymore. Ethan was by her side, and together they would fight for the truth, for justice, and for the future they believed in. But as they stepped out into the corridor, the distant hum of alarms echoed through the palace halls. Elira's eyes widened. It was too soon. They were coming for them. "They know," she whispered, her voice tight with dread. Ethan's hand immediately reached for his weapon, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "Get to the ship. Now." Without another word, they sprinted toward the exit, their hearts pounding in their chests as they prepared for the final confrontation. The Shadow faction had underestimated them before, but this time, there would be no mercy. Elira's determination burned brighter than ever. The battle for Elira had only just begun. The hallway stretched out before them, the harsh metallic walls offering no comfort. The quiet hum of the palace seemed to echo in their ears, amplifying the tension between every footstep. Elira and Ethan moved in sync, adrenaline coursing through their veins as they reached the hangar bay. The low, distant thrum of their ship's engines was a welcome sound in the stillness. Elira's thoughts raced. The Shadow faction was far more organized than she had anticipated. They were already here, inside the heart of Elira. And they were going to take everything from her. She couldn't let that happen. Not after everything they had fought for. "We can't let them get to the ship," Illyra said, her voice tight with determination. Ethan nodded, his hand still gripping his weapon as they rounded a corner, pausing for a moment to check for movement. "We won't. Just stay close." Their eyes met, the briefest of connections passing between them before they continued down the corridor. But Illyra couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The palace was too quiet, too still, as if everyone had been waiting for this moment to arrive. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the shadows, cold and commanding. "You're too late, princess." Illyra froze, her heart skipping a beat. She knew that voice. It belonged to Valian, a high-ranking officer in the palace guard, a trusted ally, or so she had thought. "Valian," she called, her voice steady despite the cold dread creeping into her chest. "What are you doing here?" Valian stepped into the light, his face hard and unreadable. Behind him stood several other guards, their expressions equally unreadable, their weapons raised. "I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago," he replied, his tone devoid of emotion. "I'm making sure that Illyra doesn't fall into the hands of traitors." Illyra's mind spun. "You're working with them, aren't you, with the Shadow faction? You've been a part of this all along." Valian's lips curled into a thin smile. "You think you can stop us? You've always been so naive, Illyra. The council will fall, the humans will be destroyed, and we will take control." Ethan stepped forward, his expression fierce. "You don't get to decide that, not while we're standing here." Valian's eyes flicked to Ethan, narrowing. "You're still here, human? I should have known it would come to this. You've tainted her mind with your ridiculous beliefs, but it doesn't matter now, we've already won." Illyra's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't let her emotions take control now. "You're wrong, Valian. You've underestimated us. You've underestimated me." Valian's smirk faltered for just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But it was enough. Illyra didn't wait for him to recover. With a swift motion, she drew her weapon and fired, the shot ringing through the silence. One of the guards fell, the others hesitating just long enough for Ethan to charge forward, his own weapon drawn. The chaos erupted in an instant. Blasts of energy filled the air as Illyra and Ethan moved together side by side, working in sync. Each shot fired was calculated, precise. There was no room for mistakes. Not now. Illyra's heart pounded in her chest as she dodged another blast, her focus razor sharp. "Fall back!" Valian shouted, his voice filled with rage. The remaining guards retreated, disappearing into the shadows as the ship's engines hummed louder, signaling their escape. But Illyra didn't pause. She kept moving, pushing forward, determined to finish this once and for all. The Shadow faction had no place in Illyra, no place in her world. Ethan reached her side, his face grim but resolute. "We're almost there. We can't let them get the upper hand." Illyra nodded, her gaze never wavering from their destination. "I won't stop until they're gone." They reached the hangar bay in record time, the sleek lines of their ship gleaming in the dim light. The hatch was open, ready for them to board. But as they stepped inside, a new voice interrupted their escape. "You're not going anywhere, Princess." Illyra's eyes darted to the source of the voice and her breath caught in her throat. It was a woman, tall, with dark hair cascading down her back and a cruel smile on her face. She wore the insignia of the Shadow faction, her eyes gleaming with malice. Illyra's heart sank. Another enemy, but this one was different. The woman's presence was familiar, too familiar. A chill ran down Illyra's spine as the realization hit her. "Illyra," Illyra whispered, her voice barely audible. Illyra's smile widened. "Did you really think you could defeat us, Princess? You've always been so blind, so hopeful." She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "You have no idea what's really at stake. The humans aren't the enemy, they never were." Illyra's mind raced. Illyra, her own sister, had been working with the Shadow faction all along. She had betrayed everything they had fought for. But why? What had driven her to this point? Elara seemed to sense the questions swirling in Alira's mind. "You're still trying to understand, aren't you?" she sneered. "You always were the idealist. I was never going to let the humans take control, not while I still have a chance to lead us to true power." Alira took a step forward, her heart heavy with betrayal. "You were always so full of ambition, Elara. But this isn't the way. You don't have to do this." Ilara's expression hardened. "I've made my choice, and now it's time for you to make yours." Before Alira could react, the door to the hangar slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. Alira's heart sank as she realized they were facing their greatest threat yet. Someone she had once trusted completely. Someone who had been with her from the start. The battle for Elara wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more thrilling sci-fi adventures. Your support means the galaxy to us,